You're entering the MSP Zone, a podcast for the managed services community, covering news, analysis, and interviews from around the globe. Elevate your MSP game by staying in the MSP Zone. And now, your host, Charles Weaver.
Welcome, folks, to another episode of MSP Zone, where we tackle the important issues that matter to you, the practicing managed services professional. Today, we are excited because we're going to tackle a bunch of questions that have been coming up in some conversations we've been having with MSPs of late. And it seems to be on not everyone's mind, but on a lot of MSPs, more than one, more than a handful actually, who've brought up these types of issues. And so I'm going to try to tie in a growth problem, right? How to achieve growth. And the problem with lack of growth in an MSP environment may not be what you think it is. Then we're going to be talking about our kind of a marquee topic for today, Frankenstein compliance. We're getting close to October, so Halloween. And this term Frankenstein compliance it's a new term, right? I think MSP Alliance has coined it first, but the idea or the principle is something that we've been talking about for a long time, and we're going to be putting some practical edges around it, giving you some practical advice and pointers about what you can do, maybe as a beginner MSP to compliance, maybe you're intermediate or very advanced in your compliance journey. Trust me, everything's going to be applicable to you. And then finally, we're going to be talking about kind of another growth strategy problem issue, but also one that's kind of tangentially related to compliance, and that is MSP M&A integration. Now, that is not a new topic here, but we're going to be talking about it again because a lot of people have been bringing it up in conversations, and specifically talking about baselines, how to go about setting a baseline for your integration after you've done a deal. But I'm going to talk about it not only after you've done the deal, but how you do it in due diligence. Save you a ton of money, ton of time, and eliminate wasted effort, right? So let's jump right in. But before we jump in, would you do us a favor? Please go to youtube.com, go to our channel, MSP Alliance, hit the subscribe button, and click the like button. We are trying, we're not charging for any of this content, and that's fine. But what we would love to do is start doing some live streaming content. And in order to get there, we have to get a certain number of subscribers. And the only way we can do that, if you guys help out and participate. So youtube.com, MSP Alliance channel, hit the subscribe button, click the like for this video. You'd be doing us an amazing favor. Appreciate it. Okay, first topic. I've heard this from a lot of MSPs who talk about their lack of growth or they're stagnant in their growth. And they feel as an organization that it's not what they were hoping or think that it could be. And invariably, when they start thinking about that and when they start talking about that, people like me, they start with this point of thinking that it's a lack of sales. That's a little reductive, right? Your lack of growth is due to lack of sales. Sure. Fine. All right, I accept that. But that's not why you're not growing. And I've boiled it down to kind of two areas where I would say lack of growth in an MSP organization, division, or a company that predominantly does managed services can be defined as one of two things. Sometimes they're both, but generally it's one of the two. Number one, you have a limited service catalog, or actually put the opposite way, you don't have a limited service catalog. You have an unlimited service catalog. You have no problem selling something to a willing buyer who says, can you do this? And even if it's something that you've never thought of in a managed services environment, you do it. You say, yes, I'm not going to turn on revenue. So you end up doing it. And I've actually seen a lot of companies, a lot of MSPs who have said yes one or two times too many, and they end up with, for a period, a lot of customers. But what typically happens is they lose those customers. They lose at least some of the customers who asked for something that was so far outside of what the MSP should have been doing that they eventually don't deliver on that promise, and the customer gets upset or is dissatisfied, and they eventually go away, or something happened. So if, and I've said this before, if you as an MSP don't have a really, really strong idea of what your service catalog is, right? And to define service catalog for those of you who are not aware, a service catalog, service menu of items would be the list of the managed services offerings, products, SKUs, however you want to define it, however you have categorized. It's that list of a defined product set that you can deliver on a scalable basis. And if you don't know what that is, I would recommend that you start figuring that out and create that service catalog pretty soon. Because what the service catalog is going to do, it's going to enable you to understand what you do, and it's going to help you. This is going to help the sales team, right? Topic of this is your MSP growth or lack thereof is not a sales issue. Or if it is a sales issue, it's because the sales team doesn't have a menu that keeps them targeted and focused. And a service catalog does exactly that. Yeah, it's really helpful for the service delivery team, but it's super helpful for your sales and marketing team so that they don't have a wide open canvas to play with. And let's face it, I've known plenty of salespeople who they've never met a customer they can say no to, right? I mean, it's a kind of a cliched joke, but you know, sales professionals who are not disciplined and or are not given a kind of a guide of where to be heading will tend to stray. And it's not because they're bad, it's just because they're not being told to do otherwise. Service catalog in your MSP practice will make a huge difference for aligning your sales and marketing efforts to specific products and only those products that you can deliver. That's number one. That will really help with your growth and your sales engine. And by the way, I'm talking because I know a lot of you MSPs out there don't actually have sales teams. You don't have a sales methodology. Maybe you don't even have a professional full-time salesperson. Maybe it's you, the business owner. Maybe it's one or two select, more technical engineer types who do a lot of the sales stuff in the organization. And maybe you rely on referrals. Typically, that's the case. If you're not in a MSP that has a professional sales organization, often referrals are the way that you get your revenue. This helps with both service catalog, sales organization, referral engine, equally applicable. The next area that you would want to focus on in order to unlock your growth potential as an MSP is in defining your customer base. Now, some of you might be saying, well, I know who my customers are because I bill them every month. That's not what I'm talking about. What I'm talking about is having a profile, an understanding of who your companies are by type. Now, maybe that's size of company. Maybe that's their geographic location. Maybe it's their head count. Maybe it's the number of servers or objects that you manage for them. Maybe it's their vertical market that they happen to be in. Maybe they're in banking or healthcare or something else. There are so many different ways. There are probably dozens and dozens of ways that you could categorize your customers. And you could have customers that participate in multiple different categories. But if you don't pay attention and don't have a really good understanding of what those kind of vertical markets are and have a good understanding of where your customers are by defined category type, right? Again, I'm not talking about you knowing who they are by name. I'm talking about, are they in banking, or are they in retail in a particular city, or are they organizations that happen to have greater than 100 end user seats, or are they organizations that only buy this type of managed service offering, right? There's so many different ways to categorize this, and a lot of MSPs don't do that because for a variety of reasons, but doing that exercise will have a dramatic impact on you being able to hone in and unleash the effectiveness of your sales team, if you've got one, or in your referral networking. By obviously, I mean, it should go without saying, folks. I hope I'm not preaching to the choir here, but if you know who your customers are and where they are, if you're in the category of you don't have a sales department, but you've got referrals and that's what you rely on, well, your referrals can be unleashed if you have a better understanding of the vertical market categorization exercise that I just walked you through. If you do those two things, sales engine or no, referrals, you should see positive results in your growth. And I'm not saying that it's going to be the answer to all of your problems, but it is the first place that I would suggest starting to look. If you are less than happy with your growth, if you are stagnant, you are plateaued, or you're declining, hopefully not, but even if you're just plateauing and you're just not satisfied the fact that you've been leveled for so long, you're not going up, that's where I would start focused. The two areas, service catalog, defining your customer base, and customer segmentation, those two things align so many other elements and other questions that need to be answered in order to either unleash your referral network capabilities, or to make your sales team, if you've got one, even more capable and productive. So give it a shot. Let me know what you think. But that's an easy first couple of steps that I would start going to if you are not happy with your sales. And it doesn't mean that you can't have some bad performing salespeople. I'm not saying that at all. But before I even start there, make sure you've got those first two items taken care of before you go to your sales team and say, "How come you're not producing for us?" Or before you go to your account people or whoever's in charge of your referrals and saying, "Well, how come we're not getting referred business?" Start in those two places. Okay, Frankenstein compliance. Let's get scary. Um, been we've been out on the road for the last month, and we're going to be out for another month. The fine folks over at Enable, um, uh, we've been talking to them for a while now, and they had asked us to come out on the road to their Enable road shows that they do all over the world, to engage with their partners, and it's just part of their doing business. And they asked us to come out and talk about compliance for their partners, and we've been hearing a lot of questions, and it's not from these roadshows exclusively. I'm getting this all over the world from MSPs. Our team members get this type of a question frequently. So I know that it's out there. It's a concern. It's a question MSPs have. I'd like to address it. It's a combination of, where do I start my compliance journey? And it's also a problem of an MSP who is chasing the latest compliance fad or trend. And I'm going to give you a couple of examples of how that plays out. In the United States, there are a lot of MSPs who are starting to get pressure from certain types of their customers who happen to be in the defense industrial base of the United States, the DIB. We've talked about that before. And the Department of Defense which among other things is responsible for the defense industrial base, wants to make sure that that base is secured. Makes sense? Understandable? And so CMMC is a construct of the DoD and the NIST community in the US that is being pushed out and encouraged by a lot of contractors who are wanting to get their supply chain up to code, so to speak, or in compliance with CMMC. And so we're getting a lot of questions from MSPs who say, well, I want to get compliant with CMMC too. Where should I start? And our answer is always baffling to them because I give them the answer that I'm going to give to you guys, and I can see the confusion, the eyes kind of glaze over, and they're like, I don't understand why you. What did you? What? Huh? What did you mean? Okay. If you want to become compliant in CMMC, in SOC 2, in ISO, in CSF, CIS, in PAPIA, in PIPEDA, in UK Cyber Essentials, and whatever control-based framework or regulatory framework out there that matters to you or is being raised as an issue for you as an MSP, the list is growing and growing of global frameworks that are being pushed on MSPs. And so when people say, oh, how do I accomplish that goal or that framework? Our answer is this. Start with the UCS, Unified Certification Standard for Cloud and Managed Service Providers. It is the oldest, it is the only MSP-specific framework out there. It was specifically made for MSPs. MSPs made it. That's how I know. MSPs made it for themselves. Why is that the answer to an MSP who wants to be compliant with CMMC? I'll tell you why. For a few reasons. If you want to be compliant with any given framework, as an MSP, starting with your own MSP controls is the best place. And CMMC is not going to do that. Why is CMMC not going to get you your MSP controls? Because CMMC is not an MSP framework. Get where I'm going here, folks? I've said this before. This is not new. CMMC is not an MSP framework. Does it mean that CMMC is a bad framework? No. It's just not purpose-built for MSPs. And so if you were wanting to become a good MSP, that's not where I would say to start. Now back to the analogy at hand or the example at hand. The MSP wants to become compliant in CMMC. To do that, first start with documenting your policies, procedures, and controls, and do it according to your industry best practice. There are going to be some things in CMMC that have nothing to do with you as an MSP. For the vast majority of you. And there are going to be outright omissions of controls and scenarios in CMMC that were never contemplated by the fantastic people who created that framework, simply because they were never thinking about you as MSPs when they were doing their work. I could say the same thing about ISO. ISO 27001 is a great security framework. It was never meant for MSPs. Same situation. MSP says, hey, I've got a bunch of customers. Maybe I'm in South Africa. Maybe I'm in Australia. Maybe I'm in Western Europe. And they're saying, I'm hearing a lot about ISO. I'm thinking about going to get ISO. How should I do it as an MSP? Same advice. Start with the UCS. Go to mspalliance.com/UCS. UCS. Backwards for those of you looking at the camera the other way. And go read the standard for yourself. It's right there. It's published. And you can follow the standard. If you don't want to have to do it all yourself, sign up to Cyber Verify and it'll do it for you. Just answer the questions and it creates the controls. From there, once you have your controls, by the way, you can do all this yourself. Just grab a spreadsheet, grab a document editor for your policies and procedures, the spreadsheets for your controls, and then go to msplines.com/UCS, and you can start your journey right there for free. Doesn't cost you a cent. But if you do that, once you have your MSP controls aligned to industry best practices, a magical thing will happen. If you've done it correctly, you will now have controls that will either immediately or with a little bit of adjustment depending on the framework that you're looking for and the level of certification you're looking for. But for the vast majority, it will meet those other frameworks right out of the gate because that's the way our framework was designed. Over 20 years of managing it, updating it, reviewing it, making sure that it is not only cutting edge, but making sure that it is leading all the other existing frameworks that are that matter to our members globally. And we've got 35,000 members. Believe me, we hear from a lot of them about emerging frameworks that are becoming more and more prevalent in their areas of practice. Doesn't mean we meet all of them, but we meet the major ones. And what that will do is a couple of things. Number one, you will have achieved an MSP industry best practices framework. Number one, that's arguably the most important. But number two, you don't have to rewrite your controls for CMMC. Now, you might be thinking to yourself, well, does that mean that if I start with CMMC that I can't do the same thing for these other frameworks? Probably not. And even if you did, even if you mapped CMMC to another framework out there, you still have the big, huge problem of having some big gaps in your own control framework because none of those frameworks were MSP frameworks. See where I'm getting here, folks? You first have to make sure that your own ship is secure. And once you've done that, and if you've done that according to our industry standard, you will then be able to easily move laterally to all these other frameworks, and you don't even have to do additional work in most cases. And I'm talking like there may be a few cases where you've done the UCS and then you're looking for ISO, and you have to do one control that's unique to ISO because it's not an MSP requirement. There's like some. I don't even think that that's out there anymore. We've filled out all the gaps, and we'll tell you, hey, if you're looking for an ISO, you have to do these one or two things in addition, and then you will also become ISO compliant. Or if you're looking for a SOC 2, that's already done. I mean, that's if you get through the UCS, you are SOC 2 compliant. You are also CMMC level 2 compliant and level 1 by inference. And if you follow that advice and start first with your industry controls, then your controls as an MSP organization become cross-compliant with other frameworks and with very little additional effort, if any. And you avoid this Frankenstein compliance reaction, which is if you're an MSP, and we've seen some of them before they came to us, and they came to us because they're pulling their hair out saying, my God, I've got my team, and typically it's the technical team if they don't have a compliance person or committee on board. It's their technical team, generally speaking, who is tasked with doing this stuff, and they're like trying to become compliant for 2, 3, 4 standards that cover their customers, and they're just going crazy because they have no idea how to do it. And what happens, and this is why we call it Frankenstein compliance, is you'll have even 2 frameworks like CMMC and ISO 27001, and you'll have those frameworks call the same thing different words. And they'll have the control lead you to make changes to your own control, and then pretty soon you're out of compliance with the other framework, and vice versa, right? Because you're trying to, like a patchwork quilt, you're trying to apply each standard and hope that they all mesh together. And none of those other platforms mesh together without a common core language. We have that core common language, folks, called the UCS. It's what makes up the MSP Verify report. It's what makes up the Cyber Verify platform. Believe me, it's not like it came to us, easily. It's over 20 years we've been spending honing and perfecting this standard. And it's never going to be perfect, and perfection is not our objective. We seek perfection always. Do we achieve it? No. You always, because it's impossible. You always try to become better and better, and that's why striving towards perfection. The standard has been a work in progress for 20 plus years. And that's how I know it has been reviewed so many times by independent auditors all over the world. It has been issued on 5 continents in multiple languages. It has been battle tested. And I know that it crosswalks and maps to these other frameworks. How do I know? Because I've seen it. That is my recommendation to avoid a Frankenstein compliance scenario in your MSP practice. Start with the UCS. Start there, organize your own entity's controls, and from there, decide which frameworks you want and are relevant to you, and then either yourself or you can have us help you. The framework will map to those. And if it doesn't get you all the way, it'll get you 99% of the way there. You might have a few little areas that if you want, depending on the level of certification in some of those other frameworks, might be some additional work that you have to do. Again, not because ours is deficient, but because theirs is not contemplating MSPs for some reason. Avoid Frankenstein compliance. It's costly from time, money, and effort. And this way that I've just described is much easier, more friendly, and it'll get you faster to your compliance goals. Trust me. Okay, finally, M&A integration. What's your baseline? What is a baseline? Are we playing baseball now? No, it's not a baseball term. Developing a baseline for M&A, mergers and acquisitions, is really important because not only for what it does after the acquisition is closed, but for what it can do before the acquisition has closed. And that's why I want to talk about a baseline and make sure that if you are one of the many, many MSPs out there that are considering M&A on the buy side or on the sell side, but it's mainly for you on the buy side that I'm talking to. But I think some of you who are sellers potentially, right? What's the phrase? Everybody's a seller for the right price. Mostly this is for the sellers, but for the buyers, but the sellers should be aware of this as well. Having a baseline for an M&A deal is important for a number of reasons. A baseline is, from a technical standpoint, what is the acquiring MSP willing or wanting to acquire in terms of technology from the seller? Now, I'm not talking about spare servers that are left over or, extra hard drives or, monitors or spare parts. And I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about, remember that service catalog I was just talking about 20 minutes ago? I'm talking about that. I'm talking about when you're going out to market trying to find an MSP that you would be culturally and in any other way interested in acquiring. Your baseline should set forth very quickly the type of company you're looking for from a technical standpoint. Maybe if you're filling a gap, you're going to say, well, I'm looking for an MSP that has some security experience. Or maybe you're looking for an MSP that has certain vertical market experience in a market vertical that we don't cover, right? Those are fairly common things. But beyond that, you should also be looking at, well, what type of ticketing system does this MSP have? What type of RMM system do they have? What type of backup technology do they use? And you should have a really good understanding of what is going to happen to those technologies after the acquisition. How is it going to impact the customer? How is it going to impact the MSP that you've just bought? Is it going to be problematic for some reason that we don't know? Maybe a customer made a precondition of using that MSP you just bought that they had to use this particular brand of software vendor. Been known to happen. You get where I'm going. If you have a baseline of what you're willing and not willing to acquire, you will have a much easier time identifying the right M&A leads, vetting those leads, performing your due diligence to make sure that they're actually technically what you're looking for. And then when you actually do the deal, once the deal's done and everyone's happy, the checks have been cashed, but the important work begins, which is integration. If you don't have that baseline already established, you're going to have a real tough time integrating without a plan, not knowing which technologies are coming over and which are staying or being gotten rid of. That's why an M&A baseline is so critical. And you should know, and it doesn't always have to be your way instead of theirs. I've seen plenty of M&A deals where the buyer said, I'm buying stuff because the seller MSP has some technologies and they use them really well that we want that, and it's better than the technology we have. I've seen a lot of that. But even if that's you, if you don't have that baseline, how are you going to be able to go out there and make effective use of that knowledge? Write it down, have the baseline. We are looking for an MSP with this, and this. If the MSP has this type of vendor or this vendor specifically, we are not going to be interested. Or maybe we're going to be interested, but we're going to let the MSP know, the seller, we're not going to take over that licensing. That's not coming over. It's better to have those conversations before the deal closed and hopefully before due diligence, before you waste a ton of time and money going down the path that ultimately is going to be fruitless and not result in a deal. Only a baseline, a technical baseline, is going to give you that comfort and that knowledge of knowing what you're looking for. The due diligence period becomes a little easier because you're looking for certain technical things in addition to the financial and all that other stuff. But your due diligence also now incorporates that baseline reference check of, okay, what are we bringing over? What's coming over? What's that going to look like if you're bringing stuff over? How's that going to impact your cost, right? If you're bringing a whole bunch of users over, how's that going to impact your cost on your side? If you're indebted, let's say the seller has a obligation to one of their vendors, but you don't want that, right? Those are things that come up during due diligence. And then after the deal is closed, you got that integration period of, as quickly as possible, executing that baseline strategy. Because I will tell you, folks, I have seen more than a number of M&A deals have a rocky beginning or a way too lengthy integration period because of a lack of a plan. Like they're a year, 2 years out in integrating because, oh, we can't take we can't take this customer or this group of customers off of this backup, because they don't like any other backup, so they're not going to allow that, right? Well, I actually heard an MSP, a buyer tell me this, and I thought to myself, why? How come you didn't figure this out before you bought the company? Because that can't be good for you to have now yet another backup vendor to support. And I've seen some that had like multiple of the same type, and the buyer never thought about how is this going to impact us, and what are we keeping and what are we getting rid of. That's your baseline. That's your technical baseline. And in my opinion, you really shouldn't, not that you don't have the right to, but you really shouldn't be doing M&A deals if you don't have that, if you don't know what you're going to keep, what you're going to throw away, and what you're going to standardize on. And it should be not just something that the technical people know, but that should be communicated to the business people in the company who are in charge of doing M&A, outreach, prospecting, and due diligence. Everybody should be aware of it, just like hopefully someone is aware of the financial due diligence baseline that you're looking for, like EBITDA, like margin, like net income, like gross revenue, and things like that. Make it part of your M&A strategy. It will save you a ton of time, both before closing and after closing. It will save time. It will save you money. It will cut to the chase and disqualify a lot of stuff that otherwise might have gotten through and taken up a lot of your time. And it will confirm things even faster for the right candidate when they come along. So, recapping. Poor MSP growth, not necessarily due to lack of sales. Don't be a Frankenstein compliance MSP. There's a better way to do it. Start with the UCS. And if you're doing M&A in the managed services profession these days, make sure you have a technical baseline to work from. It will make your efforts immensely more rewarding and profitable. Finally, go to our YouTube channel, MSP Alliance, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button. Maybe we'll see you on the next live stream. See you next time.
Thanks for listening. If you enjoyed today's episode, please give us a like. Make sure you are subscribed to the podcast so you will get notified when future episodes are released. We will see you next time in the MSP Zone.